On Star Trek 3, we had a little more money to deal with. We were able to introduce some new models and do more detail and introduce another Federation ship, and all of those things were a little bit of a toy box for us, a little bit more fun.
You know, I've worked on a bunch of these Star Trek movies, and what our job is as ILM is to keep reminding the audience that you're out in space and it's this amazing environment. A lot of the film is people standing around and talking about, you know, drama or about some sort of conflict, and it's good to keep reminding the audience every once in a while that you're in space and it's really cool. So that's what I see our job as. For Star Trek 3 it was great because we really opened up that universe. We saw a lot more of what was out there.
The space dock in particular was a fun piece for us in enlarging our point of view about how big things were. The team up there at ILM came up with this idea of the vastness and size, which you don't really appreciate until you know how big the Enterprise is, and then you see Enterprise approaching this small planet in terms of size. We had a lot of fun with that in terms of that scale, and I think the guys at ILM all taught us about that, which I think they were learning, of course, through the movies with George Lucas. But that kind of scale lent a grandness and an importance and a bigger world out there than just where our crew was on the bridge of the Enterprise, and that was very fun.
This is what we call a maquette of the space dock, and this was created for several purposes. One was to come up with a three-dimensional design so that various people on the production could look at it and put their input into it. Just to show you the scale of the space dock, this represents the Enterprise passing through the docking doors, and inside is an area where many ships would be docked and being serviced, and they would all exit out various locations. Here's an exit over here. Once this was approved, then we would give an estimate about what it would take to make us a 6-foot-tall model. After that was approved, then we would commence in the construction of the model. And it had lots of little lights, and instead of having thousands and thousands of individually wired lights, what we actually did is make this out of clear plexiglass. Then we painted it, and then we would scratch off the paint, and that's how we would achieve light. So those are actually just little pinholes that represent the light. Then later on in the movie, when the Star Trek Enterprise goes into the space dock, we had a larger version of the exterior, probably only, about this much of it. And I think in model size, that might have been 12 feet across. And the doors actually functioned, those remote controlled doors that were hooked up to the camera systems, and those could be cued when the camera would get wherever they had to be, and those would operate in a very smooth way, and we had lighting that would flash on and off. In 1983, there was a lot of other science fiction films that involved spaceships and such, and Star Trek had its own look, the very clean, well-maintained look. Star Wars had a very used look. Aliens was a futuristic, used look. In the Star Trek look, the producers always wanted to try to maintain the same look, the same colors, the same color palette. They all looked like they came from the same fleet.
Would you look at that?
My friends, the great experiment. The Excelsior.
One of the new things we saw was the Excelsior, which I was involved with the design on. As described in the script, it was supposed to be the next generation of starship, and everyone's initial reaction to it was like, oh, that's the future, and they kind of didn't like it. So it was supposed to be new and slick, but not necessarily new and slick in a good way. We did a bunch of designs, and all of them looked really fast and really sleek and really futuristic. And I had a couple days before the presentation, so I asked Dave Carson, one of the art directors, what should I do? And he said, well, why don't you take a pass at it? You design something. At the time, I was really into Japanese art, especially industrial design. And so the concept I came up with was, what if the Japanese had designed the Enterprise? And so I took the basic layout of the Enterprise and tried to apply a Japanese aesthetic. And it was industrial design from the 80s, where everything was getting abbreviated and simplified. And if you look at the dish especially, it's much sleeker and more angular. And the neck is thicker and broader and is more like a fin, like a heat sink. And there's this repetitive detail in it. It's hard to say, like, oh, it was based on this exact design. It was more an overall aesthetic. We presented them all to Leonard, and ultimately he went, that one, and it was the Japanese version.
We had more than just the sort of space galleons of the Enterprise and the Reliant and other carefully designed vehicles, and a whole other world below that was being introduced.
When we were approached with the Star Trek III project, it became clear very early on reading the script that there was a lot more design work involved in this one than Star Trek II. And it was a real challenge for us because when you design a ship, you want it to look as though it fits with the culture, but at the same time you want it to mirror the characterizations of the culture. In other words, for the Klingon bird of prey, we wanted it to look aggressive and mean, as well as Klingon.
When we went to the ILM people, I said, in effect, it should be like a bird on attack. It should be swooping and frightening. And I gestured with my arms this way, as though these were the wings. And somebody suggested that the wings might change their position, which they did. I'm not sure how much audience awareness we had of that, but the wings actually changed position as the thing went from a cruising position into a diving, swooping, attacking position. But I was very interested in the idea that it should have this outstretched neck, as though you would see a bird flying to attack a creature, or sometimes you see a bird swooping down towards the water to dive in, catch a fish, and come up with a fish in its beak.
Very often the way it would start would be lots of sketches, a whole variety of directions, and then we would present those to the director, Leonard Nimoy, and he would pick the ones that he would like, and then from that we would get closer and closer to the ultimate design. And what we want to get across, if we're successful with the design, is not only that it looks like a different culture, but that it has some sort of character that's reminiscent of the culture. And in other words, for the Klingon ship, it would be mean and aggressive looking. And there were lots of sketches done for the ship. And ultimately, there was never one that was chosen as, okay, that's the design. There were things that Leonard liked about some of them and other things he liked about others. And so we came up with a hybrid. This here is the very first prototype that was built of the Klingon bird of prey. And we do these prototypes a lot as study models because then you can pick them up and kind of see what they would look like in the film. This one is unique in a couple ways. One of them is that it has these moving wings, which was kind of revolutionary at the time. And that was so it could get into kind of a posture, the firing posture, which was much more aggressive. And one of the sketches that I worked from, interestingly enough, that Nilo gave me was this one here, of this muscle man. And he said, make it look like that, which at first took me a little bit by surprise, but the kind of downturned arms became the posture for the wings in the attack position. And then I also looked, the other thing that was very distinctive were these shoulders, these big trapezius muscles here. And that was the genesis of why I came up with this kind of radio fin area that would, no matter how you bent the wing, would still retain that mass and give it, hopefully, the look of the muscle man. Also, I thought that this guy looked a little bit like a football player. It influenced the way I built the prototype in that I added these large kind of trapezius muscle sections here, which were made out of these fins, these kind of radio fins, so as the wings moved, the mass still was there. And I incorporated what looked like shoulder pads on the shoulders here, and then I actually went a step further and put in a chin guard here on the command section. And all these little things add up to it kind of looking like this, hopefully reminiscent of it, but not exactly, and I think contributes to the character of the ship. Another really interesting thing about this ship was in the very first draft of the film that we got when we started, it was not a Klingon ship, it was actually a Romulan ship that Krug had commandeered somehow. And the opening sequence with the merchant man was different. It was actually all these Klingon ships hanging out saying, where is he? And then all of a sudden he appears right in the middle of them, kind of blowing them all away to show that he's a really bad character. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that since it was originally a Romulan ship, and I am a big fan of the original series, I put in this graphic on the bottom that was a little bit reminiscent of the bird wings on the bottom of the original Romulan ship to try to tie the two together. Ultimately, it was decided that it was just a Klingon ship, but the wing pattern stayed.
And that model, I think still today, is good from any angle. It's just amazing. You can photograph that model really from any point of view and have a pretty compelling image that just looks sinister and bad.
One of the things that is really important is the size of the scales, seam lines, even the sheens of the paint jobs is very important. You have to have very thin paint. If you have thick paint, you actually can see the paint. And so that's very important. Another thing, particularly with the Star Trek models, was the cleanliness of the whole thing. All the models are very, very clean, unlike the Star Wars models, where a lot of battle damage and the used look was achieved. Clean ships were much more difficult to maintain. And many times when we handled our special effects models, we had to do it with gloves. Grease and oil, very problematic on our models.
Picking up radiation from the life form.
The Enterprise model that we used on Star Trek III came from the original show, the first Star Trek movie. Just because of the design of the model, the engines flaring off in the back, and the dish in the front, and the center pod, they're quite large objects to suspend out in space, and therefore they required some kind of strength to maintain the positions of those. You wouldn't want the ship to bend when you flipped it over, because many times matter of fact, most of the models we built for Star Trek had multiple ways of holding the model, usually 6 axes, front, rear, both sides, top and bottom. So there were quite a few times when we had photographed models that were not to our eye level. They might be kicked sideways, and then they might even be upside down. Particularly, upside down shots were used when the ship would come right overhead to look like it passed right overhead. In fact, we were shooting it upside down and taking the motion control camera right over the model. So in incorporating all these mount points, that required a certain amount of strength, and also the model in general, I think it was 10 feet long and 4 foot diameter.
The props in Wrath of Khan were, for the most part, rented off the shelf. I don't think there was any custom props made for the Wrath of Khan. We tried to find stuff that would sort of simulate what they had from the TV series. So when it came time for the third movie, I was insistent that we design some things that would be uniquely part of the Star Trek world. So the phasers, we wanted to update and make those a little sleeker, a little more powerful than they were in the TV series. And definitely sort of move away from what was in just a rented prop that was sort of generic. We wanted something very specific that fit our world.
I was fascinated with the props as a kid. They seemed totally convincing to me, and very distinctive too. One of the designers that worked here at ILM on Star Trek III was Phil Norwood, and both he and I were hoping that we could take the prop designs closer to the original series. And so that's what you're seeing here are sketches of some of those prop ideas, where the Phaser 1 fits into the Phaser 2. So it's reminiscent of the original series, but has kind of a new feel to it. Like the Bird of Prey, I ended up making prototypes of all the props, which Leonard looked at and approved, and then we went into production and produced a number of them. This is a tricorder design, which ultimately we did something a little simpler and slicker that didn't have the flip-up top. A lot of the props were built out of model kit pieces that I found in the shop. Something specific like this, I would go and make the pattern out of wood. But I believe for the tricorder, it was a race car body. Unfortunately, there are lots of people that want to see flashing lights on them. To them, that's what technology is about. But for us, it was about the sophistication of the surfaces, a variety of metals and plastics, and subtlety of color that makes it look like it was manufactured. The Klingon props had much more of a dirty feel, like they had been banged around, a lot more pointy surfaces, like they would be uncomfortable to carry.
That Klingon knife, when you push the button and the things come out, I mean, that really felt ugly and nasty and like a Klingon, would have designed it. And it was much more specific and felt much more like the fabric of the movie we were making than, again, something we might see that played on Buck Rogers or a Batman series.
I think it's pretty straightforward, kind of how to design for the Klingons. The Federation is much smoother. It all ties into the ships. There's a certain aesthetic for all the stuff in the Federation, which is pretty easy to design to.
I'd like to explain a few technical processes that we employ in shooting visual effects. The way Industrial Light and Magic started was a method where things were extracted from blue screen. There are different ways of doing matte work. What's a matte? Basically, you have a background and you're making what we call an optical sandwich. If you think of putting many still shots together in still form, it's probably easier to understand. You have a background, and maybe you have a planet that, let's say it's stars. Then you have a planet that goes in front of that. And then you might have a spaceship or two. And maybe you're looking through a view window. So you have a window, and you realize the shot is two actors looking out a window at another spaceship against a planet, against a background. So instead of any number of other methods where each of these things might be a miniature and shoot it all as one piece, that has been done certainly in the Buck Rogers days. It was done that way, where people would just build some miniatures and hang them from a wire and shoot it with the actors right there. Of course, everything wiggled around and bounced around, looked entirely fake, but we loved it back then. So as time has progressed, everybody wants things to look more real and steadier, and the mass of a ship has to move in a way that is more appropriate for the size and so forth. So therefore, the method that ILM has always taken is break the shot down into individual elements. So the stars would be one element, star background. The planet, the background spaceship that we're seeing out the window. The foreground window piece is a set piece, and our actors. So to do this, breaking this all apart so that you could have individual pieces of film that you could sandwich together, the actors would be shot in a window set against blue screen, acting like they're looking out at this majestic spaceship. Then the spaceship would be shot as a motion control miniature. That's something that we would do on one of our track cameras. And the ship would usually be set at the end of the track and lit appropriately depending on what the sunlight is. And everything in the shot has to align by way of lighting. All the pieces must look like they were shot at the same point in time. So if you decide it's a 3/4 backlight coming from the camera right side, every single thing in all the series of elements must be shot the same way. So to have it nice and steady, that ship is basically sitting there, and the camera is what does the moving. Therefore, you don't have to move all the lights. And again, that's shot against blue screen. Then you have the planet, which may be a model, or it might be a matte painting, just against glass. And then the stars, if you want them to have a drift, that's shot just as a starfield background that is either painted or rear lit with black paint, plexiglass, lots of holes poked in. We had a star field that we used many, many times that we used for that. Simply panning or tilting the camera to give us star drift would give us that element. Now, then you have really no blue screen to pull from the star background, but all the others you do. The blue screen is the first layer on a color piece of film. So if you think in terms of just chemistry, the reason why we've always liked the blue layer so much at ILM is because blue is not really in flesh tones very much. And so if you essentially take blue out of a shot, you're not taking any flesh tones out of the shot. And when you extract or break down into black and white views of the red, the blue, and the green parts of that color shot, you'll have all these different pieces of film that now you can actually eliminate the blue layer, which gives you a whole. And in our case, we've got actors against a window. Suddenly you've got completely clear celluloid with photo information. And this is again done chemically. Once you have that, then you make a reverse. You have a window mat and a black center. Those are just simply reverses of the same thing, where you'd have black characters and black wall with clear celluloid for the window, and the reverse of that, absolutely black window with clear figures and clear wall. So, and each of these things, why do you do that? So that you have a mat to hold out for the ship, so you have no light falling onto your star field, and then the next thing that goes in is the foreground window, and all these things are layered, and it's the job of the editor, at least in that period of time, to keep track of when one thing would cross over another thing. So some things would go under, some things go over. So you've got to have a mat with your ship crossing over the background. So when you pass light through all these pieces of film onto yet a new piece of film in the optical printer, you come up with no light being placed on the background piece of film until you want it to be. So you use all these puzzle pieces, and again, I was speaking sort of in terms of if it was a still photo, but once you go into motion, everything's got to move correctly. So all your mats, traveling mats, you may have heard of, all your traveling mats have to move absolutely synchronous to the object that you photograph. So you have that black ship moving bipacked with the color photo ship, or the window that allows light to fall through where you go onto the new piece of film in the background. So it sounds complicated. The concept is simple, but it's really easy to mess it up. Some of the hard parts are whenever a ship is moving. Now remember, you shoot the ship not inside the dry dock and not on any of these runways. So then there's a problem if you see on this background miniature a bunch of lights that are sitting there. Well, then you expect to see the interactive light on the ship. So when you shoot the ship, the interactive light that should be falling on it, you have to put in. So actually we would rig little motors, because once again the ship isn't moving, the ship is sitting still and the camera is moving. So you give the illusion of it pulling out or moving, and therefore we'd put lights on little movers. And I'd have to look at it and line it up on the film, looking at the moviola, and I'd say, okay, well in 16 frames I've got to go from here to here. So then I go back out on stage and I figure out, okay, 16 frames I've got to go here, here, so many fields across on the screen. We break it all up into quadrants. Okay, well then the motor has to go this fast. So we'd figure out how fast our motors have to run so that everything looks like it was all shot at the same time. So there's a lot of, I always like to think that in whether it's Star Trek or any of the movies that we do at ILM, we sort of create these puzzles and then we have to solve them. And that's what our daily living situation is. We never quite have the answers when we start in, but we're trying to make something that looks real.
Reflections were a very big problem with blue screen, in that if we photographed the model in front of a blue screen, it tended to have bounce light around the edge of the models. And particularly if the model had a sheen to it. So many times we'd have to go back in with talcum powder, baby powder, and talc certain areas so that would kill the reflection. Today, that's all eliminated with digital technology they have today. They can take care of that, no problem. But that was always a really big issue for us in 1983.
Get out! Get out of there! Get out!
For the explosions, we actually shot it upside down so that gravity would be our friend. Out in space, there is no gravity, so if you shoot it upside down, the explosion goes off, everything just rapidly plummets to the ground. And when you shoot with the camera rolled over upside down in the saucer that way, then it always looks great. Ken Ralston had devised a method where he would have a section that was essentially wax. He'd go in with a hot torch and burn away frame by frame little sections of the skin of the Enterprise. That adds to the deterioration of the skin of the Enterprise. One little trick that we came up with that looks great is if you pack different sections of it with steel wool and light those on fire and then roll film, it puts all these sparks and debris and everything out. It looks fantastic. That's what's in the movie.
My God, Bones. What have I done?
What you had to do. What you always do. Turn death into a fighting chance to live.
the explosion of the planet at the end of the film, that was a very large miniature set up on the main stage. It was our only stage at the time. And the effect had to be that it had to look like the whole surface of the planet was breaking apart, so it had to sort of move and break in cracks and pieces, so from camera point of view it was clear that it was not only breaking apart but separating, and fire and explosions coming out from below. It was actually a very complicated pyro act to kind of put together, and there had to be an area where it had to be essentially clean, where Kirk could be standing, and hopefully there wouldn't be any pyrotechnic debris going all over the very spot that you're going to put the two characters over the top. That was always a problem, where we couldn't go in and very easily clean things up. Now, if we got a bunch of debris or smoke or something that went across the area that we're essentially going to composite our two foreground figures into, well, putting layers of smoke in to make them look like they're nestled in, that's easier now. It was very difficult then, and I think people quite often ask, well, what's it like between the technology of today and the technology of photochemical, especially when you're ganging up many pieces of film to composite together, and then somehow come out with a single piece of film that's clean, without matte lines, and everything's just the right color. It was incredibly difficult. You're dependent completely on mechanical devices to register each and every one of maybe 40 pieces of film just with their purse, so they all lock in together so you don't have wiggles between the mats. My God, these days it's so much better because you don't have matte lines. Just to get a take without a matte line was a big deal then, much less have color and contrast control and all the rest of it.
I think my favorite thing about Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, was just that it opened up the Star Trek universe. It was the first film that really showed how broad that universe could be and kind of foreshadowed what we would see in the future.
We expected Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, to explode the way it did. 3 days after the 3-day opening, Michael Eisner, then head of Paramount, called me and said, start writing Star Trek III. That is the fastest green light on any project I've ever had.
But Leonard, now that he had died so gracefully and so well, so movingly,
Live long and prosper.
He now says to management, you want me back? They said, yes, Leonard, you're wonderful, you're so handsome, so graceful, you're so talented, you're so imaginative. He says, you think so? And everybody at Paramount bows down. I saw a whole line from the top of the management to some of the busboys in the restaurant, all bowing like this, nodding their heads to Leonard. Leonard walked among them, blessing them, blessed the head of the studio. And then he said, if you want me in your film, I want to direct the film. And their jaws went, uh-huh.
Gary Nardino, the executive for Paramount, much to my surprise and pleasure, said, I've had that thought myself. So I thought, well, this is easy. Asked to direct a movie and they say yes. Didn't turn out to be quite that easy, but that was the beginning of it. We left with a lot of hearty handshakes, great, wonderful, and I expected that their business affairs people would contact my agent and start to work on the deal. How much money, etc. And there was silence, and when my agent called the studio to try to make the deal, they weren't responding. And some weeks went by, and I thought, this is very strange. And then finally, I had a talk with Mr. Nardino about it, and he said, well, Michael Eisner wants to meet you, who was head of Paramount. I thought, okay, I'm ready for that. And I had this meeting with Mr. Eisner, and I told him exactly the same thing I told Mr. Nardino, and he too said, great idea, great idea. Nimoy directs The Search for Spock. Great idea. He was thinking promotion, he was thinking publicity, great story to tell to the press. And we left again with hearty handshakes and a lot of backslapping, and then again, silence. For weeks, they wouldn't take our calls. So finally one day, I called Mr. Eisner. And he picked up the phone, said hello. I said, hi, it's Leonard Nimoy. Hi, how are you? Fine. I said, Michael, I'm confused. I thought we were excited about the idea of me directing this movie, and my agent can't get a response from your business affairs people. He said, you know, I've been thinking about it. I can't do this. I can't have you direct this movie. I said, why? He said, well, you hate Spock. You hate Star Trek. You had it written into your contract that Spock had to die in Star Trek II. You wanted to get out of it. You wanted to be done with Star Trek. I can't let you direct this movie. And I said, this is not true. I did not ask for Spock to die. It was not in my contract that Spock must die for me to appear in Star Trek II. He said, it wasn't? I said, no. I said, Michael, the contract is in a file in the building that you're in. Would you go to the trouble of having somebody pull it out of the file and take a look at it and see if it's in that contract? Oh, no, he said, I'll take your word for it if it's not in there. I don't know how this word got out, that it was in the contract, because it was not. Well, okay, this is a different story. I said, Michael, we should have a face-to-face talk again. He said, come on in tomorrow. I said, what time? He said, 9 o'clock. I went in the next morning at 9 o'clock, and we talked for about an hour. And very shortly after that, within a matter of days, we'd made the deal, and I was set to direct Star Trek III.
In restoring Spock as the goal of the picture, the pathway was clear. We were going back to find Spock.
Well, there were some promising threads, story threads, to be dealt with. There was the Genesis planet had been created in Star Trek II. There was the death of Spock that had to be dealt with now. We're going to find some way of finding out what comes out of that Spock casket that we've seen sitting on the Genesis planet. I wanted to introduce the Klingons into the story because there's now this very valuable and powerful Genesis device, and they would have heard about it and would have been threatened by it. It had overtones of a Soviet-U.S. kind of combat.
Genesis was now, in our mind, analogous to the atomic bomb of our day. Suddenly, the race for atomic power became the pathway of this story. Who would get this device? Could this device be stolen? And if it were stolen, would it become a weapon? And for whom? Those guys.
The remember thing had to be brought into play. What do we do with that remember thing? So we came up with this idea that Spock had sort of one computer feeding another, downloaded everything out of his brain into McCoy's brain, and we called it Spock's katra, meaning everything. We described it as everything that was not of the body. Gave him everything but his body. He gave him his spirit, his intelligence, his information, just poured it all into McCoy, as though it could be retrieved out of that brain, McCoy's brain/computer later. And we began to deal with that issue. The idea was for Dee to be carrying this Spock persona, which troubled him because he wasn't completely gone. McCoy was still present, was still there physically and intellectually.
Could I offer you a ride home, Dr. McCoy?
Where's the logic in offering me a ride home, you idiot? If I wanted a ride home, would I be trying to charter a space flight?
He was a person who'd been taken over by a spirit. And there's some history of that in the theatrical literature, going way back to a piece from Jewish writings called the Dybbuk, where the soul of an individual possesses another person's body. And I think that's probably where the roots of that came from for me.
I sat down at my typewriter and I wrote a scene, and the scene was the last scene in the movie.
Your name is Jim. Yes.
So, backpedaling from that, I began the search. And 6 weeks later, we had a script. We had very few modifications.
And I kept saying, Leonard's going to direct? You know, my brow furrowed. You see this line here? That happened in Star Trek III.
I do think that he came to work on 3 with a little bit of, I'm going to test Lenny, see if he knows what he's doing. And maybe some of the other actors had the same feeling. It's kind of caught me a little bit by surprise. I thought, maybe I was being naive, that when they heard that I was directing the movie, they'll say, "Oh, great, one of us is going to do the job." You know, I don't think they were all too ready to take that position too readily at the beginning. I think the attitude was, "What is this going to be about?" You know.
Now, I'm going to tell you a story that you'll have to believe that it is the truth. I was doing a series at that very time. I was in a series, a police series, and Leonard came running over to me and he said, I got to direct one of your series. I don't know quite what to do with the camera here. So, Leonard directed a segment of the series I was doing. And I helped Leonard. Every shot, everything he knew, I taught him. He took that out of the segment and he went to direct Star Trek 3, and he was my acolyte. He was apprenticed to me. And therefore, Leonard owes me more than he has ever admitted in public before.
I had the good fortune of starting in movies with a cast that knew their characters. So we didn't have to explore to figure out how does this character talk, how does this character walk, what is this character's attitude. That saves you a lot of time. And I knew some of the sets. We had used these sets before. I was familiar with them, so it wasn't as though we were going to run into surprises with the sets that would slow you down and say, well, we can't shoot this today because it doesn't work the way it's supposed to.
Leonard did a fantastic job. We had a lot of fun developing some of the effects, sticking the camera up in the rafters for the Vulcan planet, looking down at the procession coming out of the mountainside. We got to go on location for a day. Woohoo! You know, that was a big deal for us. We were landlocked. We were in sound stages the whole time, and to go outside was like, wow, this is really a big movie.
Should I talk about wanting to go to Kauai? All right. Originally, when we got into these conversations, I thought it would be a very good idea to take the picture outside and to go to the island of Kauai. A picture called King Kong had just wrapped up there, and I had seen some of the dailies from it. And it was just a phenomenally lush place to shoot. So I thought, gee, this is the perfect place. But I had to be overruled on that because in the picture Star Trek 3, there's this tremendous earthquake and the planet starts to come apart at the end. And it would have been impossible to do that on an exterior. So we built all the stuff you see, that were running around in forests and all of that was all done on stage 15 at Paramount.
The fact is that it was a claustrophobic shoot. We were shooting planet exteriors, but we were shooting them all on sound stages. And the reason for that essentially was that the look had to be bizarre. It had to be unusual. It had to be of a certain tonality of color and structure and what have you. We had to have cactus in the snow.
I still had kind of a bug about not being able to go to Kauai because I still thought it would look much better as an exterior. So lo and behold, we start shooting the Genesis planet, and a huge fire breaks out at Paramount.
I remember the fire in the lot emphatically. So, I'm making that's right. So I'm making Star Trek 3, and I'm shooting a series. I'm about to shoot a series at the same time. In fact, the movie was made during my hiatus period. So, I have a start date on the first of some date was the beginning of this series, the second season of the series, the third year of the series. I had to be back, and I'm making this movie, and this movie is falling a little bit behind schedule, and I know that I have one day to finish the film and get to the series. And I'm walking along in the studio one day, and I see smoke, and I run to where the smoke is. It's coming from our set. And I open the stage door and I look in and I see the flickering of flame on the set. And what goes through my mind is not get out of here, save somebody's life, the studio's going to go up, none of that. What goes through my mind is, we're going to lose a day, and I am not going to be happy, and the people at the series are not going to be happy. There's going to be a terrible conflict.
If I can be just a little cynical about this right now, I was thinking, my God, I'm going to get my wish. We're going to end up going to Kauai because this place is going to burn down and we won't be able to use it. But through the efforts of a lot of people on the lot, in fact, a lot of people in the cast and crew went out to help fight the fire. I think Bill Shatner himself was out there.
My desperation was not to save anything but the one day that we would lose on the set. And I'm spraying away when the fire people come in and tell me that these are toxic chemicals and get out and they'll handle the rest. I may have been the one that was instrumental in saving the day. Not only did I save the day on the set, I saved the day of the schedule. And they restructured and rebuilt and repainted.
And there were huge holes in it, so we had to put up these huge black curtains to keep the sunlight from coming out. But it almost destroyed, the fire at Paramount almost destroyed the stage.
And when the firemen came in, they saluted me. And I saluted back. And I said, it's all yours now. Ducking low underneath the smoke and the flame, I emerged, blackened but triumphant.
Christopher Lloyd, who was just an absolute joy to work with, a chameleon actor, if there ever was one. This is a guy who can really change persona, character from one performance to another. And he came in and read for me, and I went to Harve Bennett's office and I said, he's a chameleon. He can do it. There was some concern, which I recognized, and the concern was, well, won't people think he's funny because of the character that he played in Taxi? He was so brilliantly, wonderfully funny as this kind of dazed kind of guy in Taxi. You know? And I said, you know, I'm not the kind of guy, I'm not the person you should be talking to about typecasting issues, because I've had my share of those, and I think I've managed to play other characters besides Spock without people saying, oh, he can only do Spock. So let's not get into that. If Christopher Lloyd can do this, and it's going to work. And that was the way it went. He was wonderful to work with, and wonderful on film. It brought the power and the authority to it that it needed, the intensity that it needed, and did it very, very well.
Come on, pull! Jontener! Kach!
There's always a couple of moments here and there where I feel like it could have been sharper, it could have been more clear, but there were certain moments that I remembered when I shot them that I felt I captured the character well. And when I've seen the film a couple of times over the years, I'm still feeling, yeah, I did that, I got that. And there are some moments that I feel if I had to do them again, I feel I could improve upon it, but that's with everything.
I remember watching Christopher Lloyd work, what a pleasure, and admiring and actually being somewhat envious of the fact that he was such a visceral actor. There's one scene in particular where in this scene...
I ordered no interruptions.
What's that? Federation starship approaching.
Bring me up.
We had to do several takes of that because it didn't seem as though he was as involved with props as I was. He didn't really relate to the communicator so much as he would put his arms out wide and he would scream to the heavens, "Bring me up!" You know, and Leonard would have to stop the action and ask him and remind him to bring the communicator to his mouth, that was actually in essence what was getting the message up to the ship above, and he'd nod his understanding, yes, yes. And then we would set this shot up one more time, and, you know, lo and behold, again, his arms would go wide to the heavens, and he would scream, "Bring me up!" And you know, it was just so interesting that he did not need to be anchored that way to his character. He was just so big and so fabulous, and certainly didn't need a prop to get him up on a ship. You know, he could be beamed up without the communicator.
I got a kick out of it, just a ball, because you get a character like that where he just, you know, go all out, being crazy.
Aha!
Leonard explained to me that Vulcans have 1,000 years of wisdom behind the eyes. That was one of his notes. I certainly don't think I exhibit 1,000 years of wisdom behind the eyes, and there's nothing remotely self-controlled or logical about me. I mean, I'm one of those people that cries at McDonald's commercials, so I emote from almost every pore, every orifice. But I think that when I'm attempting, and this is one of the things I did in preparation for the character, I would look into the mirror and I would try to even express the simplest thing that my character might say without emoting, without moving my face in any way. And it was just so hard. I felt so constipated throughout the course of the 8-week shoot at having to keep everything in. But I think somehow, even though I did my best to remain so self-contained, something was always coming through anyway.
So,
and I
your
think
father,
that that's
you
what
changed the rules.
Worked in some cases.
If I hadn't, it might have been years or never.
How many have paid the price for your impatience?
In her own Vulcan way, she quietly reads him the riot act.
How much damage have you done? And what is yet to come?
I'll never forget the day that I had to tell Kirk that David is dead. You know, this was another moment, you know, for me as an actor, and for the character that was, I knew was going to be, I would need all the help I would could get from Leonard. And I wanted so much just to inject the littlest amount of regret, of sorrow in this brief communication. And Leonard wouldn't let me breathe in the wrong place. He directed me very, very closely in that exact moment. You know, it near about killed me, this repression. But I managed to get through it, and I had utter faith in him, complete and utter faith in him, that as the creator of the Vulcan race and their traits, that he knew best. I really did, and I did not, you know, I was not one of those actors who came to the set and said, well, now, you know, I think this is the way we should play this character, Mr. Nimoy.
Admiral, David is dead.
Ambassador killed my son.
My memory of the approach to that scene, I said to Bill, let's spend some time exploring on the set here and see what you feel about where you'd like to go and how you'd like to do this. And I asked everybody else to clear the set. So all the other actors were off the set, within earshot, and as soon as they were out, within seconds, Bill and I started acting as if we were having a big fight. He started yelling at me, I'm yelling at him, and he's yelling things like, no, I'm not going to do it that way, and I'm yelling, you'll do it the way I tell you to, and we're throwing things and slamming chairs on the floor to make noises. I don't think we fooled anybody at all. I think they knew exactly what we were doing, what was going on. And he started walking through it. I can't tell you, you'd have to ask him whether he stumbled back against that step by accident, whether he had planned to do it. Very likely, because Bill was a very inventive and theatrical guy. I thought it was a very touching and brave choice. The captain falls down.
Tus tráilers.
And
Visita mi
it's certainly
canal.
appropriate. Very vulnerable and very human in having just discovered that the son that he has just found, not long before, has now just been executed, murdered. So I was taken with it, and I said, yes, I think that's very touching and very wonderful and very powerful. Let's do that.
I want to share a beautiful example of Leonard's direction, which takes place at the end of the film. Leonard came up to me just before, moments before we were about to shoot this scene, and he stepped up very close to me, and he put his mouth right to my ear, and he whispered to me, he said, Robin, how would you feel if you were to encounter, say, on a New York City street, someone that you had loved, someone that you had been intimate with years before, and now he moves away, and he's right here in front of me, and he's waiting for a response, and all at once, I felt so many things. I looked at him, I looked up at him, and I want so very much to answer his question, but I blushed immediately because his question embarrassed me somewhat, and I remember I looked away because it was just so sort of overwhelming, and then I come up again, and he said, "That's it. That's what I want." And so once again, it's this sort of mixture of, he somewhat tricked me. He tricked Robin into sort of feeling something that he now wanted me to employ as Savick.
Look, I come to Star Trek, and always have, from the actor's point of view. People have asked me over the years what I thought was the ingredient, or what were the ingredients that made Star Trek so durable and so successful. And there are many, but certainly one of them that has to be taken into account is the performers, the chemistry of this group of people.
How can you be deaf with ears like that?
Don't call me tiny.
This isn't reality. This is fantasy.
Aye. And if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a wagon.
The word is no. I am therefore going anyway.
Beginning with Star Trek II, we began to find our footing again, using the characters, the actors, to help carry story, to tell story, and to provide emotional content for the pictures. And I think that was crucial to making them work. Bill Shatner's importance and contribution in Star Trek. Amazing, amazing. It was so easy for people to make fun of him, to write him off as hammy. He was easy to imitate with his kind of attack on a sentence broken up arbitrarily into strange pauses and clauses.
I have had enough of you!
I don't think anybody has a clue how important. I tried to talk about it in Mind Meld. I tried to talk about how important it was, certainly to me, what a great opportunity it created for me to be able to play against that energy. His jauntiness, his energy, and not just in performance, not just on camera, but constantly driven to build it, push it, improve it, make it bolder, more exciting, more dramatic, more theatrical. I think it was an incalculable importance to the success of the series and the movies.
That's the story of Star Trek III, as far as I'm concerned.
One of the things I wanted to bring to, I hope I brought to all the different Star Treks I worked on, 2, 3, and 4, and for 3 in particular, because it was such a big film, is a different approach to shooting the models in a film where the characters are utmost importance in this project. Well, the spaceships are all as important as those characters. They have as much character, especially the Enterprise out of all the ships in this. It has a very specific character to the series, the TV series, and the film series. And so designing what that character is based on all of the background, being the fan that I was, on Captain Kirk and Spock and Bones and everybody who was in the ship and how it, just what it was used for and what it meant to them, basically. And it all comes into play. You really have to design so much of that into it. And then once that creative process is done, figure out technically how you're going to pull it all off. And this film is full of different types of tricks. Models, there's matte paintings, there's the pyrotechnics, there's all kinds of odds and ends, there's puppetry, a lot of variety, and you just try and build something beyond the fact of what it seems like just on the surface into it, which is all about character.
Get up! Look, quick!
The way the monster dog was created is I did some sketches for myself, trying to come up with some idea that I thought was kind of cool and was relatively simple to do. Then I sculpted the maquette of the creature out of Sculpey, basically, and just created this model to see if Leonard wanted it or not, thought it was cool. And once that was okayed, basically I sculpted the large dog in clay, full scale, And there was molds made. It was cast in like a skin of latex and some kind of urethane inside of it. It basically was a simple hand puppet. There was some rods that would operate like legs and odds and ends, because it really didn't have to do very much. It sort of just sat at Chris Lloyd's side next to the chair most of the time in the Klingon ship, and it just kind of did shtick. You know, it really had no other purpose than to be just kind of a cool addition to Chris's character. And essentially I was inside the chair, and I had my arm, I think it was my left hand, in the head of the thing, and I was just operating the head, doing stuff and looking around. It blinked and did a few odds and ends. One thing I do remember is, this is just what happens on sets, there was a second dog. So when the ships hit, the dog would be dead lying down on the floor. That was always the plan. It just sat there. So they're going to rehearse it. Leonard says action on the rehearsal, and Chris starts doing his scene, and he picks up this stiff dog. It looks terrible. Of course, Leonard's loving the scene. Chris is like cradling it in his arms. I'm like, no, no, put it down. So during lunch, I went inside the stiff dog, cut all the wiring out of it, all the stiff rods and stuff, chopped the heck out of it. I think some of the grips got me some lead weights. I started gluing them inside this thing. We were racing because right after lunch they were going to shoot this scene. So trying to make this thing work for this shot that was never discussed. So essentially I just weighted it down, chopped off all the stuff that gave it the stiff quality so we could pose it. And we just laid it on the floor. So when Chris picked it up, I know I took the tongue and put lead weights in it. It didn't work that hot, but it was all I could do. And put a lot of methicel, which is this organic goop we put on everything that happens to be a monster for some reason, to make it look like saliva inside the mouth. And Chris did the scene, and it just squeaked through. But that was kind of like, wait, hold it! So we had to scramble, miss lunch, and got it ready for the scene. But luckily it worked. There's those ridiculous worm things that I did that turned out okay, but I don't even know what they are, sort of these creatures that are forming around the casket of Spock, basically. And they sort of mutate into these gigantic sort of worm creature things. And I also designed those and did the puppetry on a lot of it, and shot a lot of the second unit stuff where we had stand-ins as the Klingons and all that stuff. And again, they were covered in methicel, and I can just remember lying there trying to operate this thing with Chris Lloyd, and just getting covered in this muck that was always dripping off of these things. Chris is a strong guy. I didn't realize how strong he was until the scene where he grabs that thing and he's like choking it to death in the movie. Well, he's grabbing my wrist and just, you know, I thought he was going to break my wrist in that shot. I was like, man, this guy is powerful. And I don't know exactly what was going wrong with those things, but something in the mechanism of the mouths, and there was this tongue thing, was falling apart. And I am in great awe of people who do really complicated on-set sort of creature work because of the variables that can happen on a set, and things break down. It's a nightmare. And you're scrambling to get them to work while everyone's standing there staring at you as the clock's ticking and the price tag's going up. And it was just kind of, I just figured that really wasn't the world I wanted to be in so much. I'd rather do post-effects work on shows, not be on the set doing it. I have very fond memories about, because of the freedom it gave me, of course, of just having a lot of room to play with designs, play with shot design, work with the lighting of ships and things like that without a lot of just way too much management and control by Leonard and Harv. And not that they weren't welcome to, they just knew that it was smart to move away and let us do our thing. And if it wasn't working, they'd certainly be in there saying, no, you know, Leonard would be saying, can't we change this or that, just like I was saying about the models. But essentially I had a tremendous amount of freedom on 2, 3, and 4 to just throw my own ideas in and get them in the movie. It was great.
My name is Maggie Spock, and I make, my partner and I have had our business since 1971, and we make a lot of the jewelry and insignia and things like that in the Star Trek films. and have since Star Trek: The Motion Picture. And we like to think that what we make will help the person seeing the movie get instant, maybe subliminal clues to what's underneath what the dialogue is saying. Is the civilization that's wearing this fully formed? Is it primitive? Is the character vain? Obviously, is it a good guy or a bad guy? But there's just so many things, small clues that can be picked up by what people are wearing. It was very unformed in Star Trek I, except for the Klingons. And I think there were only 3 Klingons in Star Trek I, and we had a lot of time, which in succeeding ones we did not have. So Bob just designed and designed and designed those Klingons.
Hair and makeup departments were more cooperative on Star Trek than on most films. At least at the beginning, I was allowed to participate. I could sketch hair and makeups, and sometimes it would be used, sometimes it wouldn't. I did sketches for the Klingon, including the knobby forehead and head. And the makeup department very generously said, "That's great, we'd like to use it." Gene Roddenberry was not too enthusiastic. He thought they should look more like just people. And I said, "Yes, but these are real aliens, and they're evil aliens." I think the audience wants to see something that is not just folks, that goes beyond just folks. In my mind, all the bumps on the forehead and so forth are vestigial remains of a people that evolved like crustaceans, like lobsters, and who have their skeleton on the outside of their bodies. And over the millions of years, they've lost that complete outside skeleton, but now retain only vestiges of it. And in the clothing, also, if you turn on the back of the Klingon, there's a leather spine that is part of the uniform that is symbolic of the way they used to be before they evolved more completely.
Everything was handmade. On their baldricks, there were big hand-cut-out, sawed devices that, they didn't mean anything then. We just were inventing them with Bob, and they just looked fabulous. But my God, the work that was in those things. Everything was handmade, and the clothes were hand-quilted, and all the little hard borders were made of felt and boat resin and, put with bronzing powders, and they were just works of art, those first ones. Star Trek III was, of all of them, the most fun for us to work on. We, because of the Vulcans. Vulcans are beautiful. I mean, there's like the 3 main designs in Star Trek. There's the Federation design, which is always a little bit in flux in terms of its period and where it's going to be. There's the Klingons, where once they were designed for Star Trek I, that's the Klingons. And then there were the Vulcans. And the Vulcans, in my mind, were just some of Bob Fletcher's greatest art. It was beautiful art, and he pulled it from a lot of different periods. Some of it was Babylonian, some of it was French, some of it was all over the map. And it all came together in these beautiful shapes that were partly rounded and partly angular. And it was determined that all the different Vulcans would have characters on their robes. This was first established in Star Trek I on Mr. Spock's black robes, and on the few priests and priestesses that were in that movie. By the time we got to Star Trek III, these had gotten very much a part of the Vulcan culture, and it was determined that, for instance, there would be no blue on Vulcan, no blue stones, no blue anything. Now, I'm not too sure whether this is because They were going to shoot with a blue screen, and so they didn't want any blue. But so all the rocks had to be ambers and reds and maybe a little bit of green, but not much green, and yellows, and these wonderful rich earth colors. And so it was our first like big getting into casting resin rocks. And if you look at the costumes of Sarek, his big ceremonial tabard has these huge rocks on it. And I mean, sculpting these things was difficult, but it was just a total pleasure because they were beautiful. If you have this just lying there, the Sarek breastplate, it doesn't mean much, but when it's on him, then it looks really cool. And this is the Vulcan breastplate, which I actually have one of. Our remaining copy of the Vulcan breastplate, and I think they're gorgeous. Although I do have some blue stones in there. They were just some colors I had left. I wasn't going to sit and cast a whole lot of extra stones just for us, so forgive me the blue stones. And then we gave one to Bob Fletcher at the end where I made clear stones for all of these and put all of our pictures that had worked on the movie underneath them and sort of painted it weird colors. But anyways, that's that. And you can see what Bob wanted on this, and this is the kind of designer he is. He wanted all of the units to appear that they are floating. He didn't want it to just look like a breastplate with stuff stuck on it. And so everything, all these units, and this whole unit was just put on afterwards, and all these things have to have these huge undercuts. And in those days, the rubber molds weren't as good, and you know, you didn't have the terrific silicones that you do now, and trying to get these undercuts as pronounced as he wanted them, and then to give the background. Of course, this painting has faded away in all these years, but we endeavored to make the background look as though it was like a brown leather, and then these old gold units were floating on the top of it, and not just that it was an ornamented or repoussé or something breastplate. Yeah, so that's that. And this was a little Spock rock. I mean, this was one of his special colors. I mean, there was a special red that we only used for the Mr. Spock necklace and for some other things, which is really beautiful. This is me very much a long time ago wearing one of the maiden hats before the gray hair. And that's the handpiece that later appeared on someone's head. I have a photograph from one of the Star Trek Next Generation where the new wife of Sarek is wearing one of the hand pieces on her head. So recycling takes place in all the Star Treks, and it's always fun to see. I mean, you know, Sarek still got his necklace because his necklace is a big deal. And that's the Sarek necklace of which I spoke. It's beautiful because it all moved and was hinged, and you know, in my mind it looked like a piece of really fine jewelry. It just was exquisite. The Klingon necklace was all lost wax cast bronze, hinged, moving everywhere, just a beautiful piece, and there's ever only going to be one of it. It was lost for a while, but last I heard it was found again. We had to make a mock-up of it at one point and try to resculpt it in a fast and dirty way for an exhibition, and it was very hard. I mean, it's really hard to even remember what you did because pieces of it went around the globe, and just even casting this gray stone so that it had the right. I've got so many failed castings of it still in a box over there because either they were too opaque or too transparent or something. It had to be just right. And then this was Christopher Lloyd. This is where we invented officer Klingons so that there was a bit of gold on them rather than just all the pewter silver. So this is where we started putting the gold around the buckles and having some gold on their baldric. And then these, the gold knuckle dusters, which were individual rings rather than a whole set of brass knuckles, because it's hard to act in brass knuckles because if you open your hand they fall off. And this way they were individual rings, but they gave a feeling of a whole. Then this gal was all Chris, and we made her a headdress and a buckle and all kinds of stuff. And then she was shot in such a small set that she doesn't show up very well at all, but it was really fun. That was Dame Judith Anderson's Vulcan ring. And then, oh yeah, the other thing about this movie is that you had the civilian clothes in it. Uhura's futuristic but still African feeling necklace took a very long time to figure out what it would look like, that it would, you know, still have this sort of sense of being a primitive work of art, but at the same time be in the future. And obviously, you know, you have to make the ivory and you have to hammer the copper and then plate it so that it looks like antique gold, and that's what we did. We also made Asian, Japanese themed stuff for Mr. Sulu, and Russian feeling stuff for Chekhov, and everybody's civilian clothes echoed their national origin. And so that is pretty much all that we have left, except for one of the old, sad little original pins. You know, they lasted a long time, all the way up to all the generations. The next generation, they were using these things. And they still kept elements of the design. And I think that's what's great about the Star Trek films, is that there's a history. And so even if they're not using this pin anymore, they're using elements of its design because it is its own history, and it's kind of made up as it went along, but the history really works in it, I think. I really don't know another film or set of films that invented its own history and is really mired in it in a positive way.
What I like is when science fiction operates on several levels. I try to do this in my novels, and Star Trek does it too.
The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one.
I find especially interesting a comparison between Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, and Star Trek III, Search for Spock. Underneath these two films is a battle that's been going on in our own hearts and minds throughout the 20th century, and is going to be even stronger in the coming years. There is the look forward mentality that believes in progress, that believes that human beings can get better. And there is the look backward nostalgic point of view that says things were better, and that if we try to improve ourselves, we'll only fail. This has been going on for a long time. Every human civilization believed in a golden age in the past, when people were better, when they were more like gods, they had more knowledge. And they fell because of some arrogance from this state of grace. Ours is the first civilization that has taken this golden age and put it in the future and said, we might get better. Our children might be better than us. Their children might be better than them. Isn't that worth working toward? We're part of this long process of changing the environment while the environment changes us. And as long as we know what we're doing, it can be a fairly benign process. As long as our morality keeps rising and we care about the victims, perhaps we're a people who might be justified in being allowed this kind of power. And that's, I think, what's portrayed in Star Trek II. The notion in Wrath of Khan that if we are good people with high moral values, that we would be allowed, somehow by fate, by God, by the universe, to have so much power that we could create whole environments, and that the thing in front of us that we had done, we would look at it and say, it's good. Or as Kirk's ex-wife says,
can I cook or can't I?
In the movie you just saw, a world was brought to life with an impactor which within a matter of moments creates a biosphere and a condition suitable for life on an entire world. Well, our studies suggest that while you can destroy a planet quickly, you can't build one up quickly. On Earth, we have evidence that giant impacts have decimated the biosphere in matters of moments. But our calculations suggest that to bring a world to life is a much longer, slower process. We think that in a minimum, to bring Mars back to life, as an example, would require 100 years. So there's a difference in how fast it takes to destroy a house versus how fast it takes to build one up. The same analogy applies to the planets here. You could destroy the Earth very quickly with a large impact, but to build another Earth on a planet like Mars is going to take longer and may take 100 years or more.
Well, Mars exploration is a major commitment now. Right now, we're waiting for 5 probes to go next year to Mars from 3 different space agencies. The United States, Europe, and Japan are all involved in exploring Mars. The United States is committed to a national Mars program, which has missions going at every Mars opportunity, 2003, 2005, 2007, 2009. We see robotic exploration becoming more complex. More will be done on the surface, longer and deeper investigations. We'll hopefully be bringing samples back from Mars. I would like to see a Mars outpost be set up, an outpost that could be someday used by humans, in fact maybe even at the first human landing site, but would be started to be developed by robotically, where we start to make fuel on Mars, build power supplies, get navigation systems in place, and actually build a Mars outpost that would serve both science and exploration now and the notion of humans exploring there in the future. I hope humans will go to Mars in the not too distant future. If it isn't going to happen, I don't know any purpose for a human spaceflight program except to explore other worlds. And in that sense, I think as the United States and Russia and Europe consider the future of human exploration, they're all pointed toward Mars. But terraforming, of course, is the process of changing a planet's atmosphere so that we humans can adapt to it.
In the space program, we're familiar with the concept of making a small habitable volume, a spaceship, even imagining a life support system that could be based on plants, maybe the size of a building even. But these are small, self-contained ecosystems, life support systems. If we extrapolate that now to a whole planet, not only is it a much larger, much bigger problem, but it's more subtle in the interactions that must be maintained. When we have a small volume and we're trying to maintain its habitability, we can do so directly by controlling what is allowed in and outside of that volume. But when we have an entire planet, we must rely on natural cycles and natural processes which deal with the flow of elements in that entire planet. The way the Earth is habitable. The Earth is habitable in a much different context than the way a space capsule would be habitable. And when we contemplate making the step from small habitats in which humans live on Mars to maybe greenhouses in which humans and plants live on Mars, to the final step of Mars as a habitable world, we have to make that transition from a small, inside, controlled environment to a global, self-regulating environment with feedbacks among the elements that are essential for life. And that step is a critical step, and I just point out that that step is a step that's essential to our understanding of our own biosphere. If we're to understand how the Earth works, if we're to understand the mechanisms that maintain the habitability of the Earth, we need to understand how habitable systems in general can work on a planetary scale.
Well, Mars is a very special place. It is the only world we imagine the human species being able to take hold at and explore.
Is it even feasible to consider that there was a biosphere on Mars and could be in the future? When we do a study of any of the other planets besides Mars and Earth, Venus is too close, Mercury is too small, the Moon lacks water and any sort of volatile elements. The other planets in the outer solar system are too far from the Sun. Besides the Earth, Mars is really the only candidate in our solar system for a biosphere, for a world that could support life.
It has an atmosphere, it has water. In fact, a recent discovery of ice sheets accentuates that water could even be more available than we thought. It has indigenous resources that could support a human base.
I've had a long-standing interest in the question of Mars and life on Mars, and in particular the notion that early in its history, Mars may have had an Earth-like biosphere, may have had life, and then the counter question is, could we restore that Earth-like biosphere? Could we make Mars alive again? I see those two questions as being related, and my work involves studying them both, looking back in time at Mars's early history and using that evidence of water and life on early Mars as a blueprint for how we might bring Mars back to life. Earth and Mars both started out habitable. Mars is no longer habitable, Earth is. Why the difference? Well, we think the difference is that Earth has what we call plate tectonics. It's big enough that the crust on the Earth is broken into little plates that move with respect to each other, and they recycle the material on the surface of the Earth. The biological and mineral material on the surface of the Earth is recycled. And, for example, the carbon in organic material and the carbon in carbonates turns back into carbon dioxide and comes up through arc volcanoes, completing the recycling on the Earth. That recycling is essential to maintaining the habitability of the Earth over its entire history. Mars, although it started off with an Earth-like environment, did not have recycling, did not have plate tectonics. We think the reason is that Mars is 10 times smaller than the Earth in mass, and the smaller object of Mars just could not support the plates and the tectonic motion that the Earth has. Lacking recycling, Mars lost its initial habitable state over time. Maybe after 500 million years, Mars would have no longer been habitable because it no longer had the ability to bring back the elements into the environment that were essential to maintaining its climate condition. So in a sense, bringing Mars back to life is jump-starting that recycling process artificially. Making Mars habitable will, I think, necessarily involve two major steps. The first step is warming up the planet. The main problem with Mars right now from a biological point of view is that it's too cold for water to be liquid anywhere on the planet at any time. Without liquid water, there won't be any life. That first step, warming a planet, can be done fairly efficiently. We know how to warm up planets. We're doing it on Earth, which is probably not a good thing. We're introducing into the atmosphere of Earth gases which can warm up the entire planet. On Earth, where the temperature is warm enough to start with, this is probably not a good idea, whereas on Mars, introducing those same gases could be just what the doctor ordered. So poison on Earth could be medicine on Mars. If we could produce those same gases on Mars at the rate that we're producing them on Earth, Mars would warm up fairly quickly in a matter of decades to 100 years, and we would have a warm, habitable, water-rich world again. And these would be super greenhouse gases, carefully chosen so that they wouldn't destroy ozone, so that they'd have no ill biological effects, and so that they would have a long lifetime against the Martian ultraviolet radiation. These gases, so chosen, would be produced in the factories and literally just released into the atmosphere. And as they built up over time, Mars would get warmer. As it got warmer, the carbon dioxide from the polar caps would come into the atmosphere. Any carbon dioxide absorbed in the soil would come out. Mars would get a thicker atmosphere. As the atmosphere got warmer and as it got thicker, the ice in the ground that we know is there, the ice in the polar caps would melt. Rivers would start flowing. We would once again have a warm, wet world ready to receive life from Earth if there's not life there already. After we've made Mars habitable, it still will lack plate tectonics. It still will be the small world it is today. So eventually it will once again lose its habitability. But remember, the time scale for that could be as long as 500 million years. That's a long time in terms of the scale of life forms or human civilizations. So the concept of building a biosphere on Mars and maintaining it for 500 million years is still a long-scale project in terms of an environment, in terms of a place where humans might live, in terms of a place where other life forms from Earth might live, or in terms of a place where Martian life, resurrected, might continue its evolutionary path. Either way, the future that I'm contemplating is a planet with life. And to me, that is an important environmental and ethical, if you will, decision. That Mars with life is in a sense more appropriate, more valuable, more suitable than a Mars dead and without life.
Someone once said, and it's been attributed to a lot of different people, which is either we are alone in the universe or we are not. Either answer is profound, and of course that's true, and it'll have tremendous philosophical and social implications and understandings about ourselves, and that's what's motivated us through science now and through religion and folklore and mythology at other times. If we do find other life, it's our relationship to that other life is going to be a key and critical question, and it will be one just like the face other explorers when they've explored different parts of the earth and interacted with species, except we are now a lot more mature in our understanding of that as a civilization. That'll be a key question. If we don't find other life, it'll even accentuate how precious we are and our special responsibility. Either answer is going to, I think, have profound technical implications, technological implications in the way we conduct our exploration program, but also philosophical and social implications in the way we think about it. And I look forward to maybe grappling with these as we explore outwards. And what I really like about Star Trek, of course, is the way they grapple with it. They have actually given us some really profound thoughts about dealing not just the prime directive, but the whole idea of how we grapple with very difficult questions of ethics as we deal with other environments and our relationship with other environments.
The Genesis Project can be looked upon as arrogant. It can be looked at as conceited. We are actually daring to try to pick up God's tools and make a new form of life, whole raft of new life forms in an ecology, first inside a hollowed out asteroid, but later on in a planet. A lifeless planet will be terraformed almost instantly by the Genesis wave. This is the power of God. Is it a good thing that we're trying to do it, or is it a bad thing? Take a look at what happens when Kirk sees what his ex-wife has done.
How do you feel? I feel young.
The pride that you feel, that the director and the actors want you to feel in this accomplishment, conveys what Marlowe, or maybe Faust, in the better versions of these myths, are trying to say. If we're good people, shouldn't we have a right, like teenagers, to sneak into the Creator's laboratory and unroll the blueprints? This is seen as a good thing in our new culture, if your teenagers do it to you. But is it a good thing if humanity does this to God? Wrath of Khan takes the answer, yes. And then comes Search for Spock. And what happens is the director and writer for this film take out the old Frankenstein mythos, and they say, we are going to check off every box in the old legend of Frankenstein, whose basic tenet is, how dare you pick up God's tools? You will be punished for it. It's wrong to pick up God's tools and try to create life.
Speak. Impressive. They can make planets. Share this with no one. Understood, my lord.
If you do, you'll create a monster that's flawed, that falls apart, that proves that it's no good, that decays, that betrays you. Victor Frankenstein pays for trying to make life. In Search for Spock, the Frankenstein mythos is taken to its logical conclusion. The monster kills its creator, David, as punishment for the arrogance of creating new life. Fiction inspires new scientists, and there's no doubt about that. Many of the new workers who are finding cures for cancer or helping to develop artificial intelligence so that we will have aliens among us, or learning how to speak with other creatures on this planet like dolphins, whales, chimpanzees, or just creating the general excitement of the 21st century. Many of these people read or were influenced by science fiction. And yet it's not the mechanistic aspects in which science fiction really achieves its most powerful influence. It's more in the area of warnings and enticements, especially dire warnings, because the most powerful form of science fiction is the self-preventing prophecy. Prophecies that scared us with a failure mode. Take Failsafe, On the Beach, and Dr. Strangelove, 3 science fiction movies about accidental World War III, nuclear war, that frightened us into taking extra measures to prevent accidents. Take Harry Harrison's Make Room, that turned into Soylent Green. This film and book served as a diptych to Rachel Carson's book Silent Spring, and recruited millions of environmentalists. Who knows, they may have saved us. And I'm thinking especially of Orwell's 1984, the most powerful of all self-preventing prophecies, because it girded us with such a frightening tale about technology and dictatorship gone mad, that we have been armed against that failure mode. Anytime we see a trend we don't like in democracy, people yell, "Big Brother." It's the self-preventing prophecy that I think is the most powerful form of science fiction, including those that warn we may not be moral creatures in the future. What if we disobey the Prime Directive? What if we abuse those who are more innocent than us? This is a theme that we see just as much today as alien invaders abusing us. More and more, we're starting to see morality tales of what if we misbehave? Maybe we should do better.
Well, there is a symbiotic relationship between science and science fiction. Very often people dwell on what science fiction has given to science, and it certainly has been inspiration. Gene Roddenberry, the creator of Star Trek, for example, is a great friend of the Planetary Society. He helped us get started and convey this whole public fascination with space exploration. And certainly people like myself, I've been inspired by Star Trek. I'm a great fan of it. But there's another part of that relationship, which is how science inspires science fiction. And if you look at science fiction as it evolves, you'll see more and more science facts coming out. The idea of water on Europa or planetary atmospheres, what we've learned about the possibilities of past life on Mars, the evolution of the planets around other stars. These are themes that come up in Star Trek, they come up in much of science fiction, and they're a result of what we've learned about the planets in the space program by visiting them. And I think there's a great symbiosis, and it works both ways.
The standard answer you often find in science fiction literature is, well, we're going to wreck the Earth and we're going to need to move somewhere else. Well, I think that answer is flawed both practically and ethically. I think it's flawed practically because we just don't have the technologies to move people from one planet to another. And it's not even in the near-term future. It'll be easier, in fact, to make Mars habitable than it would be to move any fraction of the population of the Earth from Earth to Mars. More deeply, that reasoning is flawed ethically, because what it says is that, well, look, we can wreck the Earth because we have somewhere else to go. But I think the problem with that argument is that if we don't know how to take care of the Earth, if we don't know how to maintain the habitability of the Earth, we're not going to be able to know how to make Mars habitable as well. So I think the approach that one wants to take in considering the question of why is, what can we learn from Mars that will help us understand the Earth?
I think that's one of the principal benefits of planetary exploration, is to understand our own planet and take care of it better. Terraforming of other worlds will go on. It goes on our own world. We do change the environment on our own planet. The human presence is either a part of our environment or an effect on our environment. Either way you want to think about it is equivalent, and certainly that will happen as we go out and explore other worlds. So I don't regard it as an either-or situation. We will terraform Mars or we won't. Once we go to Mars, we have, by definition, begun some kind of impact on its environment. If we do that stupidly, it'll come out badly. If we do that intelligently, we hope it will come out better. We may not know everything. We may have to learn and adapt there as we have on Earth. I hope that what we are learning is going to contribute so that we can do that in a very beneficial way, not just for the present population, but for all future populations.
If we imagine going to Mars and finding there on Mars a single Martian microbe, an ancient bug from billions of years ago, a separate type of life, completely different from anything on Earth, I would argue that what we want to do then is make Mars habitable and make it habitable for that microbe. let that microbe be the genesis of an entire Martian biosphere, a biosphere of Martians. You might argue, well, doesn't that shortchange what we might get for Earth? But I'd say no. In fact, Mars full of Martians might give us such a deep understanding into the nature of life by having another type of life to compare to, the nature of evolution by watching an independent evolution of a separate life form, and the nature of biospheres by having a second biosphere made of a second type of life to study, that the practical benefits to the population on Earth might be enormous. It might be in our selfish best interests to allow Martian life to flourish, because when Martian life flourishes, we learn the most about medicine, about agriculture, about habitable worlds, so that our generosity to other life forms may come back to us in a deeper understanding of our own life, and in ways that could have practical benefits for the masses, for the general population, not just for scientists. So I contend that the Star Trek view of seek out new life forms and new civilizations and to explore new worlds is not just a view that satisfies the curiosity of a few scientists, but it's a view that generates knowledge that in a way can come back and help everyone on Earth, help our understanding of medicine, our understanding of agriculture, our understanding of things that are of fundamental importance to our everyday quality of life. And I think the case of a Martian microbes fits into that paradigm. By putting value on the life form that's there and putting value on the intrinsic life of Mars, if it has its own life, will not just be a powerful ethical statement, but it might have powerful practical benefits back here on Earth.
Why would you do this?
Because the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many.